Welcome to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, where you'll hear insights and useful strategies, as well as lessons learned from other nonprofit leaders and valuable tips from a variety of experts. Here to help you with the challenges and opportunities you face day after day is your host and nonprofit leadership expert, Sarah Olivieri.
Hello, nonprofit leaders, and welcome to your go-to place for information and inspiration to help you be even more effective. I'm your host, Sarah Olivieri, and you're listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. My guest for this episode is Compassiviste founder Ali Horriyat, who left a lucrative, profit-driven world of finance in 2016 to devote himself to his vision of a society where compassion, empathy, and social impact are at the heart of our actions. And we're going to be talking today about his journey in doing that. But before we do, I'd love, Ali, for you to share a little bit about your background and who you are as a whole person before we dive into more things technically nonprofit.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me on the show. Let's start. I was born in Dubai, raised in multiple cities, Dubai in Europe and North America. Did a whole lot of schooling, not really because I wanted to, but because it was an escape for me to stay independent and living abroad and just, calling home saying, Dad, I'm doing another master's, and they'll be okay with it. And then I got into the workforce again. I got into the trading world, not because that was my aspiration, but because I had so many degrees and zero job experience. So nobody would hire me. And so I had to branch out on my, and I knew a little bit about Forex from all of my travels. So I started with that and then dipped into a few other things. And one thing led to another, and I got into establishing a fund. The fund grew exponentially to become one of the largest in the nation. And the law of diminishing returns kicked in. So the more I was making money, the less exciting it became. Kind of like giving a child their first ice cream. They love it. The second cone, they'll think you're crazy, but they'll have it. The third cone, they'll have it. They'll puke, but they'll still have it. And then the fourth one, they may just choose not to. And,
Yeah.
that was where I was at. And so I decided to walk away. I walked away, as you mentioned. And when I walked away, I wanted to dedicate myself to something, as you said, with social impact and make a difference in the world. And I knew I could because I've seen myself go through different stages and phases of my life. And essentially, to use a competitive word, came out a winner in all those stages. So I knew I could be a winner here. And winner for me was making change, making progress. But I quickly realized that money was leading conversations like it was in my finance world and the power the money brought to me. And I quickly equated that with addiction because I remember taking a few of my friends to rehab myself and being in the program with them, with the doctors and learning really about how, addiction rehabilitation works and therapy and everything else. I noticed within myself the same problems they were having to being addicted to whatever drug they were addicted to. I was addicted to money and allowing money to open every door and lead the conversation and kind of that kind of philanthropic effect, which we see very often today as well in the world.
Yeah, I just want
The
to
money
pause
driven
right there
addiction.
because I think there's such a gold nugget for nonprofit leaders listening. So often nonprofits get sucked into kind of transactional type fundraising. And I'm often reminding them that it feels really good to give. And, so good to the point that here you are describing it almost like it could become, an addiction because it has such a powerful feeling over people. So I just want to highlight that because so often we don't hear that story in the nonprofit space from the side of giving. So carry on.
Mhm. And so to be able to actually do the work I wanted to do without allowing the money to lead the way, I decided to give it all away. And I took every asset penny that I had, put it all in a basket and just gave it away. It was, the largest one-time donation, still is after all these years, which is sad because I would have assumed a lot more people would give a lot more. And a lot of more people have become so much wealthier that they could afford to give a lot more, but it's not happening. And I became homeless for the first time. And I lived through that. And that's really how capacity started happening because I realized how community and, this grassroots level, and how people with really their backs against the wall were able to survive day to day with the support of each other and with the support of community and many programs that are there at, in front, participating in the action, so to speak. And Compassiviste really started for me there. I thought it starts with compassion, but then I started remembering my own life and how many times in the freezing cold of winter of Toronto, Canada, I would walk by a homeless person and feel bad. Not that I would laugh at them, I would feel bad, but which was compassion. And I would walk by them though. And I thought that part of compassion is great, but it never helps. It doesn't change anything. The part of compassion that actually makes the difference is the participation, is the action.
Yeah.
So if I can turn around and act on my compassion, that's where I really make a difference. So I thought we need a word that describes that, one word that describes that. And I couldn't find it in the different languages that I do speak. And so I thought, let me build it. And Compassiviste came about, which takes the first part of compassion and the last part of activist.
Yeah.
And then the E at the end comes from Latin, French, the languages that have the feminine, masculine gender. And I really believe it comes from the feminine inside you, the power of nurture, the power of love, the power of caring, which is from whether you look at it from a universal mother nature perspective or a human mammal animal perspective. It's always the feminine lead that allows you to grow that compassion. And so I put that E at the end to always remind every compassivist that calls themselves that they are leading with the feminine as opposed to the patriarchal system.
Yeah, interesting. So here you are on this journey. So many folks who find themselves having amassed some wealth will then put that money into a foundation and start from there. But you've taken a different journey and essentially, it sounds like, started this foundation without having already given away. So how have you, and I'm getting love from a puppy here.
Hello.
I mean, this is Sprocket.
You want to be on the show too?
He does. For those watching the
Say
video,
hi.
they get to say hi to Sprocket. Um, how is that? How did you start this foundation? Coming at it, having already experienced probably some of the challenges and benefits of giving away money, right? It's not quite as simple as as it might sound. And how has that influenced how you have set up? And if you could just give us an overview, like basically what is the organizational structure that you've gone with?
So I traveled extensively from 2016 to 2019 when I started setting up the organization. And over those 3 years, I lived a nomadic lifestyle. And I went through a lot of different parts of the world. I mean, I was in Iraq, I was in London, England, I was in different, really different parts, different cultures, different systems. And when I was in London, I had a few friends who supported registering the foundation and getting started. And so I did it there. I started with a nonprofit charity registered in the UK. And then I decided, it's not a national thing that I'm trying to do. It's a global thing. It's, a mindset shift at a global scale, especially to the global north, because everything we do at Compassiviste is trying to save us from what we're expecting to see in the next 50 years, 100 years. And so you can't really target a street and say, this is for that. It's really global. And so I realized I needed to expand that. So now, 501(c)(3) in the US, charity registration in Brazil, different parts of the world where they can be involved. All of these came about with just tapping into resources, networks, and essentially begging people to understand the idea, like it, and be a part of it. And not necessarily financially, but with the efforts they can put in. Everybody has a certain amount of force, a certain amount of energy, provided to them, whether this came through inheritance or whether this came by their efforts through life, education, experience, whatever it is. And you can hone that. You can direct that to where you want to. And with a little bit of conversation and collaboration, people came together and everybody decided to bring their force to the table and, together direct it in a path that it would work best. I recently found out you're a sailor, and in sailing context, I mean, that's what we do when we sail. We study the force, we study the wind, and we use that to our advantage to how we want to go, how fast we want to go, even, and what angle and what routes we want to take. And we study the currents, the ocean, or the sea, or the waves, and everything else. And this is really the same. You use the universe to your advantage and see the currents and see the flows, and just ride with it. And that part came from sailing.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, I am a sailor, and that's so true. Sailing, what I love about sailing, which is the same thing I actually love about the work of nonprofits, is that it's extremely dynamic. There's many, many elements at play interacting with each other. And yeah, and I think interestingly to your work, it's interesting that you brought up sailing as that analogy, because so much of sailing, I find, is about finding balance, finding that right balance between the forces of nature taking over.
Mhm,
And you, as a sailor, you can gain essentially too much control and ruin the
mhm.
whole thing. And it's really about getting the boat in balance, getting your crew in balance, having the experience be the right balance of fun without being terrorizing or boring.
Because it
So
can quickly turn dictative as well, right? I
that's
mean,
right. That's
you
right.
can see that in sailing. If you have a captain who's a little kind of pirate-ish, then things become troublesome quickly. So yeah, and I really, for the first time in my life, I mean, coming from my previous work, I was a dictator at the office, so to speak. And because that's how things work in the finance world, you don't have time to negotiate and speak and understand people or their problems or anything like that. Things change within a split of a second, and millions are made and lost within a split of a second. So there's no room for any humanity in when you're in at work in the office. Here, I had to really just throw all that out completely to be able to take in all the perspectives and have dialogue, so to speak, and have equality in this new office. And that's where sailing really kicks in for me, because like I told you, I'm not an expert. I've never, done the big routes or anything like that, but just the little bit that I know to ask and to get guidance all the time before I die in the water. So this was the same thing for me, ask before you die in this office. So that's how it really worked. And it's been working that way. We have a completely decentralized system. Nobody's in charge technically of anything, but people respond to the different arms of Compassiviste depending on their expertise within that space at that moment. So
Yeah.
that's how we function.
I love that. And that's how I think great sailing, in my opinion, you'll appreciate that my crew is a crew of skipper boat owners. Everybody, it's a
Mm,
small crew, but everybody knows what it's like. Everybody, I can't really take credit. I am the least experienced skipper boat owner on that of my crew, but it is really and harnessing all of that goodness
mhm,
so we can work together in sometimes very fast moments and sometimes very slow moments. But I think if you really want to do something great, you do have to bring together people who are, incredible. I often,
mhm,
in my work with nonprofits, I find myself talking about so many nonprofits don't have enough leaders. And what I mean by that is they don't have enough people who are, kind of have an innovative mindset, are willing to take accountability for something they don't have direct control over. That makes a lot of
mhm,
people, but people out there who like it's impossible and hard and there's no obvious answer. Count me in, right? Like I wanna see if I can make that
mhm,
happen.
mhm, mhm,
And I think partly it has to do with money. Our space is starved for money often. Oftentimes, I think of their own accord, right? There are a lot of nonprofits who could be well funded, but that's not the only reason. Um, and so that they don't think about working with, I hate the word top talent, but that's the one that's coming to mind at the moment.
yeah.
But creative, really
And
capable.
I'll add to that. I've learned so much from the people I've. For example, one thing I've learned is make sure your team has the philanthropic heart to be involved with the cause that your foundation is about. So, if you are, supporting women who've been in abused relationships, and then you have somebody working amongst your crew who has no understanding of what that means, no understanding of how that feels, no background or experience in knowing how to deal with these things and how to communicate these messages. And they're there because out of the 6 job offers that they applied for, this one responded. And so it's a paycheck. That's not going to end well, even if they're top tier. That could be top talent in workspace, but it's not going to resonate that way because there's no heart involved. If there's no heart involved, it's just not going to work. You have to be really in love with this. Is passion work. It's not work. It's passion work. This is like, the fables, when you think of Moses and Jesus and these stories, whether you believe in God or you call them fables, doesn't matter. The point is, these people came with passion. They were never offered a paycheck. They were never offered to, the story of Moses never ended as he took over Egypt and became the king, right? It was just, I want to help. And that's it. When the help's over, I'm leaving,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and that's a very important point, the exit strategy, and one of my team members, actually, another team member, he was the first person who said, Ali, I think this idea is crazy, but you know what? Let's start making mistakes. And I realized by what he meant is he's not saying let's make mistakes and screw it up. No, he meant let's make mistakes so we can learn so that we can fix it quickly and get to where we want to go. And I
Yeah.
said, that's daring. That's the way to do it. And then the exit strategy. This is something I tell people, use your previous experience, because most people don't go into the nonprofit space right out of school. And if they did, and they've done that for 30 years, then they have a lot of experience as well. But most people go from different fields into nonprofit. Take your experiences with you. You spoke about sailing. You see how much it connects to, fixing your team here. But also, I bring from the finance world exit strategy. You talk to anybody in the investment world and the finance world. If you don't have an exit strategy that's so clear and so perfected, and it's going to hit, nobody's investing in you and nobody's buying that stock, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of nonprofits go into an issue. I speak with them all the time because they collaborate with us. And we're here in Skid Row in LA to end homelessness. Great. How are you ending homelessness in 5 years? Oh no, we're just going to start feeding people at this kitchen that we're placing there. Okay, that's great. But where's your exit strategy? Where's the resolution to the problem? I mean, if I have endless amounts of money, if you're speaking with Bill Gates right now and he turns around and says, okay, I'll give you that 10 million that you want every year. Is this going to be 10 million this year, 12 million with inflation next year, 17 million the year after, and it's going to ongoing. And then you're going to have more homeless people because now more people, it's like, oh, there's food here. I'll just live on the street and, exacerbate the problem.
Yeah.
You don't have an exit strategy. That's exactly where you're going. So one of the most important things I'd like to highlight here from my experience is know where your nonprofit is supposed to close and not exist anymore. Don't be
Yeah.
proud of saying, I've been around for 120 years of 3 generations of supporting this, unless it's, disaster relief, like, earthquakes, floods, stuff like that. You can't kind of go out of business because of that. I mean, these things happen and we need to respond to them.
Right.
But
Same with like
pause it,
education,
pause
right?
it.
There's a new
Yeah,
there's a
exactly.
new round
Yes.
born every day.
And,
We
and,
need
and
with
you
it.
adapt
Yeah.
to that, right? But
Yeah.
even there, the exit strategy for education is implementing what you came to do. So if you came to make a change in the education and make it more accessible, and then later on the accessibility changed from providing actual schools to providing digital spaces. Well, did you provide the schools in the rounds that you were supposed to? No. So you're probably not going to provide the digital either because your strategies are not in place correctly.
I love the term
so-
from Agile or Scrum more specifically where they say, what does done look like?
Mhm.
No, I think that's another way of talking about your exit strategy or, reaching that milestone. So let me ask
Mhm.
you, what does success look like for your foundation and what will that exit be? What does that look like?
Success for us is minimizing suffering. And there are 2 scopes of success here. The first is minimizing suffering on an individual level. So if you go back a few centuries to a philosopher called Spinoza, he thought a lot and said, the highest value of life, not that he was the first person to say, but he said it very eloquently, the highest value of life is joy.
Mm.
That's really what we all try to get out of life. We try to get joy. Now, whether we're buying it, whether it's a big house, whether it's love, whether it's having many children, happy community, whatever it may be, living with animals you love, anything it may be, you're looking for joy. And to maximize joy, the balance there is to minimize suffering. So on an individual level, what we want to do is we want to create a membership so global, so large, ambitious and visionary as it is, that we can impact individuals to support the minimization of this suffering for them. But on a grand scale, we want this collective of millions of people within Compassiviste to be able to change the tide towards what this minimization can look like collectively. So when you deal with social issues, environmental issues in the right ways, in the ways that reduce the impact, the detrimental impacts of these things, then you are increasing joy. And that is the goal of Compassiviste.
And what does
And the exit
it look
strategy is
like? Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It looks like, it'll look like this. We set the systems and the processes into place that begin to activate these things. So when the United States as a whole can turn around and say, okay, we've implemented these 7 programs that Compassiviste has initiated, and over the next 3 decades or 2 decades, we see even a 15% decrease in the carbon footprint. Okay, it's working towards its element. That's where we don't need to exist anymore, because the systems have been taken over by the people and integrated into their lifestyles. And then it's just continuous, application of this within the people themselves, because the systems are designed in a way that we don't need to lead beyond that. So it's kind of like, somebody wants to travel, they need a passport. They'll go to an office, they'll issue a passport, but that passport office doesn't need to take you traveling. Now you know how to travel yourself. The systems are in place. You just need the document. So we really want to implement the document for people and initiate it to activate people. And then with that pamphlet and that document, you're activated, you have your resources in place, you have the tech in place, you can continue that growth to a maximum level. And this also goes to say there is no forcing people. You can only so much provide for people the opportunities and the accesses and the education that they can use to accelerate this. What I'm saying is nothing new. What you're saying is nothing new. People can go online and get a PhD today if they want to, all on their own. The education of a PhD, all on their own. But what are we using the internet for? Are we using it for that, or are we using it for a host of other things that we shouldn't even be using it for? So you can't force people into bettering themselves. They have to want it. But there's so many people in the world. You'd be surprised how many people want to do better. It's just that the education is not there, because the problems we're facing today are so new to the human mind. It's not, centuries. It's literally half a century of problems that have arisen after World War II, essentially, that dominates our, global discussion. And it's new. It's very new.
Yeah.
So we're trying to provide the pamphlets for those.
So, like, to make sure I'm understanding it and to put it into really, really simple terms, it sounds like you are creating a membership of people who are trained in some basic skills and tactics for how to be better, more effective helpers or
And in a
problem
sense, yes.
solvers. Mhm.
In a sense, yes. And in a sense also to explain to people that change on the scale that we need today to overcome environmental issues and social issues, and to remind people that you can't overcome social issues without the environmental aspect of it. Because let's just assume that we take the United States as a country and we end poverty in the United States completely. Everybody has at least $5,000 a month coming in for no reason even. Great, lovely. What happens when the flood comes? What happens when Florida and North Carolina from a couple of months ago happen again? What are we going to do with the no poverty? We're all dying in it. So we have to incorporate environmentalism into everything we do. We do that, but also we provide the programs. It's not just a matter of the education. It's a matter of providing the programs that teach people everything happens through a collective. So these changes will not happen on the individual level. You could really reduce your footprint or be more caring, more inclusive, be less biased. You can make all those mindset changes in your life. But if you're doing it alone and you're not affecting your neighborhood or your 1 mile radius around you that you're caring for, it's not going to make that change. It's great that you're starting, but you need to really pour it out. And examples, recent, Martin Luther King, less recent, Gandhi, same time frame, Mother Teresa. These are people who came in, they had a vision, they had a goal, and they reached their goals. They actually, all three of them reached their goals, but none of those three reached their goals individually. They riled up
Huge
a
followings.
community.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
yes. So people who think I'm going to do, Ali all by himself is going to go on a podium and make change. It's never going to happen. That's just the ego talking to you. It's never going to happen. But when you build the community, there is little stopping it. I mean, even on the evil side, you've seen it. You've seen communities built and, the craziness
Oh,
take
yeah.
over and
Sometimes they're
win.
because I don't want to say brave enough, bold enough
Yes.
to say out loud really bold vision.
Who they are.
I'm using
Yeah.
bold, not good bold, but maybe, less helpful bold. But people respond to that. And I think often it allows the people kind of the negative forces in
Mhm.
the world build and mass communities and
Yes.
followings pretty quickly because they're
Yes.
openly bold.
And it's
Oh,
so much more dangerous now because
yeah,
the digital world allows it to spread so
that's right.
much faster. I mean,
Huge
you know,
amplifying
yeah.
tone.
I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at 100 years ago, someone came out and said something very racist, for example, it would be their community, and then they'd have to build it to the city, and then they'd have to kind of communicate it to the next door city. It's so hard to grow, right? Though they did, but it's so hard. Today, you go online and you say something really ugly, all of a sudden you're like, likes, 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 likes. And I'm sitting there,
And then the
how many
algorithms
how
amplifying it.
yeah,
And yeah.
exactly, because the algorithm doesn't know what's going on. It's like, "Yay, this is really good stuff. Let me just promote this."
Right.
And the next thing you know, it's taking over the country, right? And then it affects the world. So that's another reason why we need to come together to protect humanity, to protect the world, to protect the animals, to protect the plants, to protect the environment. Because if we keep doing this egotistic trip of I wrote the book with the solutions. I did this. I did that. I'm the pedestal. Where's my statue in the middle of the park? If we continue doing this kind of, narrative, we're just going to all die with the flow. We
Yeah.
need to stop that. We need to come together. And that is really what Compassiviste is about. It's about bringing people together so we notice we're one. I mean, we're one with everything. I just had a talk with a friend of mine, and we started talking quick example, water. We're about 70% water, right?
Mhm.
Okay. You sail, you see water all the time. How often have you said to yourself, me and my best friend are so alike. We're like 90% alike. And you see that in your best friend, right? But you're not really 90% alike. If you were to look at each other, there's nothing alike. They may be completely different looking or acting or anything. You look at water, just flat surface water. Can you see yourself in that? You're 70% that, but can you see any of yourself in that? Most people
Mhm.
can't, which is why we can pollute it, which is why we can destroy it, which is why we can really not care for it because we don't see ourselves there. It's something that's not us. We don't care. And we don't have the education mostly to know that there's no more water. This is all the water that there was from the beginning of the earth.
Yeah.
So we don't care because there's no community. When you build community, when you see yourself in others, that's where, and that's your dog telling you, yes, mommy, I
And
see
you're
you. I see you in me and you. And that's the love we have.
That's right.
He speaks my language.
I want to ask you, before we totally run out of time, a little bit about setting measurable goals, which you haven't said explicitly, but you've certainly shared a few examples. Can you just talk a little bit about what your thinking has evolved around, measuring? You're never going to have an great exit strategy if you haven't set something measurable. And I think oftentimes those folks who work on these really big complex challenges struggle to nail down a measurable
Mhm.
goal. And I'd just love to hear some of your thoughts
Okay.
on those.
So measurable goals. I'll give you two quick examples. We have one program, which we're signing up with a TV show. It's a environmental gaming show, much like the shows you've seen on TV where people buy property and then they renovate it and then they sell it for, exponentially more profitable number. And then they do really well. What has that done to the real estate market in North America? This was a ploy that started, with the real estate board and the big players. They said, let's throw some people out there and show them that this can happen. Everybody went out and did it, right? And so the market exploded. Then 2008 happened because it was all done that way through TV. We're doing the same thing, but for environmentalism. measurable goals, we're going to reduce the household carbon footprint within 5 years by 8%. That 8% reduction is twice as much as resolving all of the carbon of the waste problem we face today.
Yeah. So let me ask
So
a follow-up question for that specific example, because I think this is where people then have a challenge. Who is measuring that and how do they do it? So I'm guessing
the measurement
our
is,
do we have governmental agencies who are measuring
yes,
average rate?
first of all, we do have governmental agencies. And second of all, we do have instruments today that are designed, the tech is there that you can install in your homes to measure your footprint. The problem isn't the measurement. The reason you asked that question, which most people ask, is because we don't know what to measure and how to measure, even if we're given the device. You take a scale somewhere in a forest where people have not kind of interacted with the world outside. Put the scale down and tell the person to go on the scale and tell them, by seeing the number that you see on the scale, do you think you're healthy or overweight? So where's it ranged, right? Weight wise, they'll not know how to answer you because they don't know what 6 feet 170 pounds means, right? You need to educate them, but we have been bombarded by not health, but physical measures that contribute. You could be 6 feet, 170 pounds. Somebody else can be 6 feet, 160, and somebody can be 6 feet, 220. The 220 may be very healthy, muscle and everything else. And the 170 could be just, skinny and unhealthy
Right.
in every way, right? You could
Yeah.
have diabetes and be skinny. People don't know the science. So, but we've been told these numbers. You want to be 5 feet this weight. You want to be 6 feet this weight. So in the same way, we've never been educated on carbon measures. So when I ask people, I've actually walked into rallies of people, shouting and screaming and yelling for environmental protection, and I've asked people ridiculous questions like, "What do you measure carbon in? Is it meter by cube square?" Makes no sense, that measure. Or is it by liter by meter square? And people think about it and then they choose one just not to sound stupid, for example,
Yeah.
right? They just choose
Yeah.
one. God bless them. They're there. They're working so hard. They're screaming, they're yelling. There's a water cannon coming at them. They're putting their lives at risk. But where's the education for the action that you're committing to?
Yeah.
And so this program's idea is to bring in the education. So we have one of the world's largest hardware retailers that is going to be on the program with specialists who are in their green department that actually will be there and say, okay, this is how we reduce the carbon footprint of this home. Essentially, the show is 3 contestants. Each gets a budget of 10,000 or 5,000, whatever it is, on a model home in an area. And then they go to war implementing different things to see who can reduce the most. This way, we can show people what the reductions are, what the carbon footprints are, what the measures are, how you measure it, whether insulation is a better place to put your money in for getting a greener home, or whether it's the aerators and the faucets. And so, solar panels. And so doing all those things with knowledgeable staff that are there on the show, and a bank that's providing a subsidized loan for greener homes that has a measurable effect that
Yeah.
impacts the government, impacts the state government, the federal government. And so you will see this in your taxation as well, because we have the implementation of this right now. If you go speak with your accountant, there are ways that you can deduct the green effects that you're doing in your lifetime. So you buy a Tesla, there are certain things that the Tesla is going to give you as I'm just using Tesla as an example, an electric vehicle that, if you buy a V8, it's not going to give you the same kind of tax breaks. So those measures are all in place.
Yeah.
And the effect of the show will start showing people how many people will start showing governments and us and everybody, how many people went to our sponsoring bank, a green bank, to actually get those subsidized loans with no interest to reduce their bills financially and to reduce their carbon footprint. So you're kind of hitting it on both ways.
Yeah.
That's one of our programs that you see measurable
I like
impact from. And all of our programs have those measurable impacts.
Yeah, I love that, example that you shared, and kind of in my pursuit to have conversations about measuring impact, what I find so often is, like you said, people just aren't used to thinking that way. And so they don't want it. There are many things that someone already figured out how to measure. And there are many things that are being measured and we just aren't tapping into them as smaller organizations. And then occasionally you find things that are hard to measure and nobody has really figured out yet. but they're almost all figure outable. There was another podcast episode, and they wanted to measure general public stigma or sentiment around drug addiction. And no one had really figured that out, but they certainly were able to partner with a university and figure out how to measure it. And I think
Mhm.
it's so important that, I always ask for examples from people, but it's my own part, just like you're doing in educating people with examples of this stuff is possible. And once you are measuring, like, and I'm sure when you launch this show, it's fun to measure stuff,
Yes,
right? It's fun to
exactly.
watch your own data or, compete with a neighbor or a friend in a friendly
Mhm, mhm,
competition, right?
mhm.
It's actually measurement shouldn't be this like, oh God, that sounds painful and awful activity.
Yes,
It's a
yes.
fun thing.
Yes, and you notice it with children. They love doing that when they're
Oh,
in
yeah.
that educational space of they're first learning to use tools and stuff, and they're growing up. All they're doing is measuring things, comparing things, and learning through that education. And as we grow up, we just get bombarded with so many things that we niche market our education. We like, okay, I don't care about all this stuff. I'm just going to focus on this because that's my career or that's my life or whatever. Then I don't know anything about anything else. But here environmental measures should be at the core of our understanding. It's kind of like understanding your own health. When you go and get a blood test and you get all these reports, you should at least know where you stand yourself. You shouldn't just look at a doctor in the face and say, am I healthy or not? You're healthy. Okay, I'm out the door. No, you should no, you should that's what the internet's for, right?
Right.
That's what the internet's for. Go there and type in that thing that we can't even spell or say, and then see what it says about it, what it does, what the function of this is, and why you're high in it or why you're low in it, and then you can counterbalance it and fix it. But
Yeah.
just to sit there and say everything was okay except this one thing, I don't know what, whatever, that you're never going to progress that way. So
That's
education is
true. Yeah.
key. The funding for education is very key because that is biggest challenge to education is the accessibility. And accessibility today means funding. It didn't mean that 200 years ago. Today,
Yeah.
it means funding. And I don't care about history in this capacity. I care about the current world that I'm in this capacity. I need to educate people today. What's the fastest way of doing it? Media. It's not school. It's media
That's right.
first.
That's right.
Second is school. You want to implement this education at such a young age that they grow with it automated in a way. You look at kids today, they email, they use all these things like
Right.
that.
I have an
When I went to school,
11-year-old. He watches the news. He stayed up late with his friend watching the election online over Discord. Like they
well,
are
there you go. Yes,
thing.
yes,
And the
things
way I
like
feel
Discord,
about
right?
school for him is that these days, like any information he wants to learn, he has access to because it is a
Mhm,
computer and it is the internet. But it's the hands-on stuff, which is still wildly missing from school, that is also
mhm.
missing from the internet. Like, he can learn chemistry from YouTube,
Yes,
but he can't he can learn chemicals and memorize interactions, but he can't mix
theory.
beakers, right? He can't set
Yeah,
things on fire on the internet,
exactly.
and that's what I wish. Unfortunately, he goes to a school where they let kids do a lot of stuff,
Right.
but that's what I real have, been seeing, kids still we all need that in practice and kind of as a real, like,
Yes.
example for everybody. I'll just give my
Yes.
own son who got really into
Mhm.
flying. He wanted to get a radio controlled, a remote it is way harder than he anticipated because
Mm.
the
Mm.
physical reality of doing the controllers and actual wind, and if you crash just once, you break the
Yes.
plane, and then it's like a week or 2 weeks before we have the replacement part and it's ready to go again, right? Whereas in a video game, it's great for rapid
Mhm.
iteration, right? And he can crash,
Yes.
try and crash and try and crash and try, 100 times in a day. But he needs that, I'm so supportive of the RC plane because he also needs those skills of working through
Mhm.
problems where
And
you
the
have rapid
and the reality
iteration. Yeah,
check of how much different the real world is
that's right.
than the school world because, in school, when I was doing my economics degree, you held all these measures as, fixed, and then all of a sudden you're like, "If we change this," I'm like, "Yeah, that's great education, but the world doesn't work that way. All these things are volatile at all times. So what's the point of this education if I can't implement it in the real world?"
That's right.
And so you need to balance these two. And speaking to education, we believe in it so much that we have an education program that's rolling out soon as well, to essentially balance exactly what you said, the real life issues with the stuff that is still not being taught in school because we teach an archaic system that was developed 200 years ago and we're still sticking to it because it makes money.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Welcome to capitalism.
Well, I think we'll have to end there. For those folks who want to get involved, who are the types of folks who should be reaching out and what's the best way to do that?
Everybody who wants to live a happy life, everybody who wants to be a part of making the world a better place, everybody who wants a future for their children or any future generation to be living happily the way they, or at least now we are in so many ways still, lucky with the world we have. So when people ask me there, I say everybody should come to Compassiviste because it's not a program for a specific skill set or type of person. It's for everybody who is a human. And everybody is a human, everybody's born human. Now, how we change in our opinions and our deviations in our mindsets is something that we can all correct for, we can all shift and bring back to a core that aligns to that universal force and to be able to all sail smoothly with the least amount of friction. And that is one of the goals we have. So everybody comes to Compassiviste. There's no discrimination here.
And what's the best way for them to reach out? Website, email, LinkedIn?
Yeah, compassiviste.com. That's it. And because Compassiviste is a unique word, obviously all the socials are at Compassiviste. Nobody's taken that before I came up with it. And email, on the website, you can contact us through there. You can go through all the different programs and the tabs and everything else. It's a journey in there. So grab a cup of coffee, go watch some of the films on our website. We have a film program too, music program, a whole lot of arts, because I believe expression starts with the arts. So Compassiviste is an artistic movement at heart as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ali, for all your work and for being here. And thank you out there for listening and all that you do to make our communities better. This podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders to expand and spread your vision to your communities, smaller and larger. I know what it feels like. I've been an executive director myself multiple times, a founder, a board member, and now I'm a consultant and coach to nonprofit leaders. And that is why I am here to bring you guest experts like Ali. I also bring you those bonus episodes each week and the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter where you can get weekly actionable bite-sized tips in your inbox. And if you're interested in receiving that, you can go to inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Until I see you again, take care of yourself, spread those bold visions out in your communities. And if you would, take a moment to leave a review for this podcast as it helps other leaders like you find it and learn as well. Until next time, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.